All right. So before I
All
get
right.
started, are we ready? Yeah.
No, go
I
ahead.
wanted to just thank all of you for the support. Dr. Davis jumping in at the last minute of my research and really just getting on track with it, helping me get to the place we are today. And Dr. Sanguris for also jumping in when I was in a crisis of having no feedback and needing some feedback, um, and for all of your statistical insights. And then Dr. Smith, we've actually worked together since my first trimester at the Writing Center. So very grateful for all of the extensive feedback and great mind conversations that we've had. So just wanted to tell you how deeply I appreciate all of you.
Well,
So
thank you. Thank you
welcome.
so much. Yes.
Yes.
And yes, we appreciate you. And you've been a great student to work with too. So I just want to introduce or welcome everybody right today to the dissertation defense of Danielle Sweetman. Now, Danielle, do you want me just to go off Sweetman? Do you want
Sweetman Richoux. I'm going for the whole thing. Dr. Sweetman
Sweetman?
Richoux.
Richoux. It's Richoux. Okay. That's what I wanted to ask you. She's a doctoral candidate in the EDD and Learning Organizational Change Program. Danielle is going to be sharing her problem of practice dissertation that she's conducted for over the past 3 years or so. So it is entitled Preparation of Teachers to Teach Diverse Populations Through New Teacher Induction Programs, a Quantitative Study. I am Dr. Brenda Jones-Davis. I'm the lead faculty for this defense. I'm going to ask each of the committee members to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your role in the program before we do anything else.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Layla Sanguris, and I believe, Danielle, I had you in class 1,000 years ago.
Yes, mixed methods.
Yes. So I talked you into it, and then am really happy that I was able to work with you in with all of your statistics for your dissertation. So I'm a lecturer in the EDD and Learning and Organizational Change program, and also the program director. So it is my pleasure to be here today.
Yep, and I am Joshua Smith. I'm an affiliate clinical professor and graduate writing coordinator for the Research and Writing Development Center that works alongside the DLOC program. So it has been a joy to be able to have conversations as we've gotten a chance to go back and I've given you feedback on who knows how many versions of the document. So really glad that I'm able to join in today and be part of the committee.
Yes.
Thank you very much. All right, so just real quickly, the format for today's defense. We'll start with Danielle just sharing for a few moments about her study. And then we will, as a committee, ask some questions for about 20 minutes. And then we will move Danielle into a breakout room and we'll do some deliberation and bring you back in to announce the results. So without further ado, Danielle, I'll let you go ahead and start.
All right, thank you for that. So my research delves into the critical issue of the opportunity gap in education, particularly concerning culturally and ethnically diverse students. So to address this challenge, my research centered on evaluating the effectiveness of the new teacher induction programs in Westow, Georgia, and how they prepare teachers to implement culturally responsive teaching practices. The existing research is very clear that the success of racially diverse students hinges on teachers receiving adequate training in cultural competence. So I conducted this quantitative study in Westow, Georgia, where I compared the preparedness of both novice and experienced teachers in schools from Muskogee County and Westow County, and then teachers' preparedness between the two counties to teach culturally diverse students effectively. I used the framework to look at the study, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy, put forth by Alm in 2012, which is built on the frameworks of scholars like Latsons and Billings and Geneva Gay. I then used the Culturally Responsive Teacher Preparedness Tool, which was developed by and validated by Richoux, to gather that data. I collected data from 30 participants, selecting them through criterion and snowball sampling, with the criteria focusing on teachers who had experience teaching in Title I schools in either Westow or Muskogee County, and who had completed the new teacher induction program in their respective county. So after I collected that data and cleaned the data. I conducted descriptive statistics analysis, checked for the assumptions of normality with the Shapiro-Wilk test, and then for both research questions, performed the independent samples t-test. So the first research question was, is there a statistically significant difference between Muskogee County and Western County teachers' preparedness to effectively teach culturally and ethnically diverse students? And the second question, is there a statistically significant difference between novice and experienced teachers' preparedness to effectively teach culturally and ethnically diverse students? So the results were not as expected, but that's kind of how research goes sometimes. The results from the independent sample t-test for research question 1 and 2, they both revealed no statistically significant difference. So between the teacher preparedness for Muskogee and Western County, and then also no statistically significant difference between the preparedness of novice and experienced teachers across both counties. There's a couple good reasons for that. I did start the study as a mixed method study. I was anticipating having that quantitative data and then pairing it with the qualitative data, and due to time and life and resources and all of it, we ended up with the quantitative study. And so the sample size wasn't quite what I would have hoped for a fully quantitative study. So the results, they imply that the level of cultural responsiveness is consistent across both counties, regardless of the teaching experience, and it's comparable. So kind of looking at all of that kind of underscores the importance of the consistent and ongoing training, that if that consistent and ongoing training is happening, there's going to be a kind of low, it wasn't a high level of, it was statistically, it wasn't significant, but it was a low level of preparedness. I wouldn't say that like 78% is the goal that I would want for my teaching staff in their cultural competence. So I think there's definitely room to grow there, just needing more data to be able to prove that and a larger sample size. So really the research has the potential to inform the professional practices of various stakeholders, including policymakers, administrators, teacher educators, and teachers, by emphasizing the need for that continuous training and resources to promote equity and inclusivity in learning environments, and just equipping the teachers with the tools they need to address opportunity gaps holistically and provide culturally sustaining instruction. I do see this study as more of like ground research. If I was going to go back in and then expand the sample size, look at more participants, and take it and do the whole mixed method study where I do interview. And that's really how I kind of see it, as like the very foundation of much larger work to come. That was all.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I just want to ask, I'm going to ask a question or two and then pass it off, and maybe one at the end. But so I know you didn't find any significant difference there, but what practical applications might you give regarding the implications of these findings, though? What is something that you could do immediately?
Yeah, so practical applications would be to just continue to like take some of the, the literature review. I can publish that. I can go back in and do some more research, but then just like what I can do immediately is just with that knowledge that continued professional development and continuous training in this area does impact teachers. And with the research, there's a lot of research. It's not a small research field. It's a huge research field over decades, that this is a good practice. So really taking that and honing in on professional developments for teachers that are in the classroom, working with teacher educators at the collegiate level to make sure that they're infusing their teacher preparation programs with culturally competent practices. And then hopefully, once there's some better data that I can bring to the table, bringing that more to the administrator and policy level place of how do we make sure that this is a guarantee that it's in teacher preparation programs and continued education for teachers, especially in the current political climate we're in with anything saying cultural in teaching and the book banning and all of that. I think it's really, really essential to push that as far up into policy as possible, even though it's definitely a road that is challenging right now.
Thank you. You mentioned you had some challenges, and maybe before I even came onto the scene, right? So if you could go back in time and tell Danielle back at that point when you started, what would you do? What would you do differently, and what would you tell her?
Well, I don't know if there's so much I could do differently in the just like the life circumstances that kind of came at me, like starting in the pandemic. Within a few months of being in this program in the first trimester, I was diagnosed with cancer and I went through 2 surgeries and radiation. And I showed up to class sometimes right from my like still in anesthesia, which is, just sit in front of the computer and pretend you're there. Um, and and so really, like, I would say, like, to just like trust the process, that like it's going to be challenging and difficult, and there's going to be a lot of things that come up, and some of the challenges that I had with my previous advisor couldn't have been, like, I wouldn't have known those were going to happen. And maybe just to like advocate a little more strongly for myself within the process, because I did get a semester behind on data collection, and a largely beyond the life stuff, just a lack of constructive feedback um, from that academic advisor. And so just to not wait so long to be like, hey, things are not okay here. Like, can I get some help beyond my advisor that I had at the time?
Well, thank you for that reflection. I think that's good. And you've learned a process and you've learned some skills and you're in a different position now. So I think that's a great reflection to make. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Sangarius and I'll try to ask one, maybe coming back at the end if we have some time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, Danielle. I had no idea about your cancer diagnosis, and it's incredible that you were able to navigate this program while also saving your life. So, I'm just sort of speechless and in awe, and also very grateful that you are healthy and that you stuck with the program, and that you did reach out to me when you did, so that we could fix the situation. And I guess my advice would be to just always trust your instincts, because you probably knew early on, like you said, but it's hard to know how to navigate stuff like that. So you handled it beautifully, and I know how disappointing it is to run the test and to find nothing. And really, I mean, when you look at the means, they are so close together that you probably knew as soon as you ran the descriptives that this was not going to indicate any kind of statistical significance. But we also know the p-value is highly influenced by sample size, and your sample size just wasn't that high. So who knows what could have happened. But one of the things that I was thinking about is, and I was, I always think about, as I read the findings of student studies, it tends to generate additional questions for me. And I thought it was really interesting that the novice teachers and the experienced teachers did not have that big of a difference. And part of me was thinking about the path that got them to where they were at that point. So, for example, the experienced teachers may have come in and may have received training related to culturally relevant pedagogy, whereas the novice teachers, that may have been a part of how they went through school. And so while they didn't maybe have that direct teaching about how to teach, it may have just been part of the fabric of who they were. And so I wanted to hear you. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I do. I think as you say that, I'm thinking of like just the fabric of our society generally, and like the reckoning that we've had since COVID with different, Black Lives Matter, book banning, the political unrest, just all of the upheaval of everything has kind of put it more in the forefront of, I think, most people's minds. And then most new teachers, novice teachers, are younger. You know, there are teachers that change careers, but they are generally younger. And I think having that different mindset is just like, they may have experienced it, like you said, in their own schooling. And they may just, you know, like just social media and people being just like, you know, there's a lot of good things to say about social media and there's a lot of bad things to say, but the sharing of information as far as, you know, what does that even mean to be culturally relevant? And I know with just like Indigenous Peoples Day, like just being on like Instagram, a lot of the academic content that I follow and stuff of like decolonization and really talking about, especially with like Israel Palestine going on right now, this conflict, looking at, you know, things from a different lens of like, okay, let's look at Palestine, let's look at Gaza, let's look at how they're actually in like a police state and it's not, it's like a human rights violation, and yes, they're fighting back, but I think just those conversations are happening more than they have in the past, and there's so much more access to it that that level of cultural competence may just be like starting to be inherently higher, which would be a really positive outlook on that for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting to think about. The other piece that I was looking at is, you know, and you mentioned this in your presentation at the beginning, that while the means were the same across the two counties, they still, a campus administrator may see the 73 and not be pleased with that. Particularly, you know, the Muskogee population was very different from the Westo population,
Yes.
as far as the students go. And so what are your thoughts on that? That they essentially had the same mean, the same standard deviation. I mean, they were slightly different, but not enough, obviously, to be statistically meaningful. So, but then when you look at the demographics of the students, it maybe is alarming that they are the same when the demographics are so different. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say definitely, like with the Muskogee County having such a higher demographic of culturally and ethnically diverse students, and then having that same level of cultural competence as a school district that has less of that population, that is concerning. And I think the 73%, like for me, like I said, as an administrator, as a fellow educator, any of it is like that's not enough for our students that are already so behind. When we look at the opportunity gap and we look at the statistically differences in the testing and how it's just like been at a stagnant level for like 25 to 30 years now, and there hasn't been any major gains. Like, is 73% enough? I don't think so. And well, it's not, like we said, like statistically significant in that way. It is not enough. And there are very research-based actionable ways that are like not that hard to implement that could bring that up. And I think if you bring that up, you also see the level of academic achievement rise. And these are also schools that their academic achievement is not very high. Especially in comparison, I did just the Title I schools in Westo County, and all of the schools in Muskogee County are Title I. And so I only did the comparable Title I schools, but that whole county has their total population is not very diverse, and the teaching staff reflects the kind of demographics in both counties to an extent. And I also think there's like a place to talk about the self-reported data, that these are teachers, especially in our current climate, that like where you may hear like, you know, like cultural competence, this, like you don't want to be seen as the young white teacher who has never thought of all these things on the survey. So you're going to just be like, oh yes, oh yeah, I do that, or kind of exaggerate, because even though it's not evaluative, like there's that level of guilt, internal guilt, of like kind of recognizing privilege. And if you haven't gone through that cultural competent training that's really comprehensive, there, you might not have the tools to really like look at where am I privileged? How has this affected my outlook on my students and how I teach them and reflecting on myself? So that could be really uncomfortable to do that survey. And I do think people probably overreport their competence. So when we're saying 73%, it's really hard to say what the actual percent is. And I think that's where that like quantitative data and the qualitative data can really like be matched in that mixed methods kind of way of then going in and talking. Okay, like how did you feel when you did this? Like kind of getting those kind of questions too of like, what did this survey taking it bring up for you to kind of see like, how people scored themselves, and then talking about their preparation experiences in college and in their new teacher induction program, and then whatever continued professional development the schools have, and seeing like, is this something that you're hearing more from media? Is this something you're hearing more in your like social groups, or is this something that you've been explicitly taught? And yeah, I just really want that data.
I know it is really interesting. And I think, you bring up a lot of what ifs. So, what would you say is maybe your top unanswered question after going through this process, analyzing the data, writing up your results? If you were to take a breather and then conduct another study related to this one, what would your focus be?
I guess like what is the disconnect between the reporting that people are doing and then like the academic results? And then also like in a bigger context, like I think getting student voices in that like data set would be really impactful, because you can say all day like I'm culturally competent, I do these things, I've even been trained in this, but you go and look at the students and you interview some of those and do some kind of surveys with them, and if they don't feel like they're seen and heard and validated as themselves in the school, like then we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
that would really be that demonstrates the importance of triangulating the data to really validate what you're measuring,
yeah,
and ensuring that it does reflect reality.
yeah, I think like especially with students and at the elementary level, like their voices get left out almost always in
Mhm.
research. Like we might have some like hard data, some statistical data that you can pull from them and their demographics and their test scores and their stuff, but like sitting down and actually talking with students, and like I've taught kindergarten through 7th grade, and I talk to my kindergartners in a very similar way that I talk to my 7th graders, as far as like they're humans and they're people. And you can sit down with a 5-year-old and ask them like, do you feel like your teachers like know you as a person? And you can get some of that data. And I think we far too often, things that impact our students the most, like we're looking at opportunity gap, like let's look at the students too. Like, they're just as important as the educators and the teachers and the administrators. More important, really, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Smith.
sounds good.
Thank you. Yes. So negative results are still results.
Yes.
You did a study, you found some things. So, especially in light of the fact that, and this is really kind of in line with the stuff we've been talking about, we have further to go. We all know, that this is the reason why you did this study. We have further to go in society and in education. So then, like, what do you make, like, if you were to like explain based on the experience you had just interacting with the people, how do you interpret the fact that there was no statistical differences? Like, what might your hypotheses be that you would go looking for if you did gather that qualitative data that you're interested in?
Yeah, I think so much of my experience is just like anecdotal in being in Title I schools for the last 15 years and observing the way teachers do interact with students, and the being a mentor in the program of the new teacher induction program, being really familiar with like what's going on, and knowing that there's not a lot of talk about cultural relevancy and cultural competency being taught in these, especially in the 2 counties, in their new teacher induction programs. I've both been through both of them, and been a mentor in them and know the curriculum and things like very deeply. So I guess more of like, what is that disconnect? And for like the hypothesis, like it probably would be more of like related in relation to student success data and looking at that and kind of tying like what is going on here in the schools and with the student success data and like what is the mismatch here, like what is the cultural mismatch that's happening, and then from there, like hopefully with statistically significant results, being able to make the recommendations of like how do we lessen that mismatch? How do we make it so that the students are benefiting from the culturally competent education that we're doing? Because I think a lot of times it's really easy to say, like, as an organization, as a program, oh, we check this box, we do culturally relevant like pedagogy, it's in there, we talked about it in this one session, like, okay, like we're all good, and then like, oh yeah, we're doing what research says, but like what's actually happening and why are the scores not like what's going on here?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I literally was, my previous defense that I was in just a few minutes ago was on AAVE usage in the classroom. And so like, I feel like this is kind of, variations on a theme here.
There's
So
so
curious
much.
to you. Yeah. And I do think that in light of what you were saying, some of the things that the connections I'm making were, it's like, what really, well, let me ask it. I'm wondering about the instrument, because the instrument does ask things in a very general way, in a way that seems like you talked about the participant bias, and the way that people kind of feel like there's a right answer to give. And so then I'm wondering about kind of how you might evaluate your instrument, if you would make changes to it. Is something that general at some level unhelpful? Like, how think about your instrument is really what I would like to ask you.
For sure. And when I was looking, for instruments, for all of the research and all of the like decades of academic work and papers and policy tied to like improving, opportunity gap and looking at culturally relevant, sustaining all of it, pedagogy, there really aren't a lot of tools to measure it, which is really interesting. When I was looking for validated tools, this was one of the only ones that was like validated and had been used in a lot of studies and had like all the right stuff, right? And I do think it is lacking in a lot of that way, as far as it is so bias of the participant, and it like doesn't give examples, right? So like a good way to like supplement that would be to give like concrete examples for each question of like, what does this actually look like in a classroom? What does this actually sound like? And I think going forward, I would probably like alter the tool and like do the just like make some adjustments. I don't think I would want to like create, I mean, with more time and resources and energy and in not in a 3-year program, like developing a tool that is more like that accounts for the bias of self-reporting, that maybe takes self-reporting and then observation, so like going in as a an observer and kind of rating the what you see on the same kind of tool, and then taking those two data sets and like, okay, now we're going to looking at a tool that puts a certain amount of weight on the teacher responses and a certain amount of weight on the observer. And then even if you wanted to go like further, like they're looking at if you could sit with their direct supervisor who does all of their like observations for for Georgia, it's the TEAK system, and like kind of triangulating all of that data right there to say, okay, looking at their cultural competence score, let's look at these 3 pieces and give a score instead of just the self-reporting data.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's interesting. And yeah, like that was, the thing that I was thinking about as you found like negative, and it's like you look at the instrument and it's just like, do you, it's like, it feels like, do you support culturally relevant pedagogy? Check yes or no at some level.
It's like,
You
are
know,
you
like
racist? Check yes or no. Are you? And you're
yeah,
like, no, no, I'm not. I'm
yeah.
not. Like,
And so, yeah, the maybe the last question, because it looks like we're about out of time, would be, do you think that this is just, hypothesizing, in terms of the people who are responding, do you think that, like, I'm kind of curious, in light of the things we're talking about, that the score isn't higher? And so then I'm wondering whether, even with the kind of like, I know what the right answer is the fact that that score is kind of at a certain level, does that tell us anything in your mind? This is, again, we're extrapolating from your data. You're a little bit off, we're off the reservation a little bit. We're just kind of thinking about it. The way you think about this, does that show that what an understanding of cultural relevance or cultural sensitivity is really a very relative thing that might be very variable or varied in terms of the individuals, but that we've learned a language about to talk about it versus how to actually do it?
yes.
How do you think about that?
I think that's extremely relevant. And thinking about, like, the correct answer of, like, this is the right answer and these are the right words, and there's all of these, like, we can kind of hide behind big words and teaching terms and acronyms and all of this kind of like gate kept information, especially when you look at the difference between like academic research and then what is actually happening in classrooms and what's being translated into that. And so I think, like, we may have just developed kind of this like white savior, almost like, look, we've done all this work on culturally relevant teaching, and we've taken these really dense research articles and we've condensed them down to these like 6 principles that are very like bullet points, and we can hit in a 20-minute PD after work when everyone wants to go home and it's 5 o'clock and you've got your kids to pick up and go to like 6 games tonight, right? And so everyone's like, yes, yes, yes. And then so when you look at a tool like that kind of spells it out in the same language, I think it is easy to be like, yeah, yeah, oh yeah, I do that. Or I've heard these words repeated in 7 different variations over the past few years. So more of that like confirmation bias of just like, oh, I hear this a lot, we talk about it, so we must be doing it. When most of the evidence, not my evidence, but most of the evidence out there in research points to the exact opposite, that yeah, we're doing all of this work. We've, you look at it from a policy standpoint, which when I did my literature review, I went through that kind of whole like policy of like, here's money, here's resources, but nothing's changing. Here's this, okay, we're doing this, but nothing's changing. So like, how many years can you go? How many decades can you go in a country that's not that old, and the education system's not that old? So when you're talking about, decades, like that's a significant amount of the time that we've been educating students. What do we do? Like, what are we hiding behind, and what work really needs to be done? I think is a great, just bigger question that I do not have the answer to. And I don't think, I think if people had the answer to that, we would have some success happening in schools in a way that we're not for our students.
Yeah, what are we hiding behind? That's just such a great question and a great way of phrasing it. So, but that's all I have. I would hand it back to Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And thank you, Danielle, for being very honest and open with your answers. I appreciate that. It's pretty refreshing. One last thing, though, I just want to know, like, what are your next steps that you want to take? I kind of wanted to ask you about your next steps for your profession. What are you planning to do?
For my profession, yeah. So I did not teach. I'm not teaching this year. I stopped teaching at the end of this past year, and we are moving to New York in January. We live in Georgia. My husband's going to teach at West Point. And so I am really looking hard for some good nonprofit mission-based education positions, either in like curriculum writing and instruction, or more like director of education or director of learning. Anything. I'm really open to the title but really want to work in nonprofits that I support their mission that are doing social justice work through education and being able to impact a larger number of students at a time. Eventually, I would really love to get more into policy, and kind of like my big dream goal in life. It doesn't always seem so attainable, but is to work on some kind of like grassroots organization that looks for really like motivated and like-minded educators at administrative levels, at teacher educator levels, at instructional coach levels, and at teachers in the classroom, and kind of like help them and like cultivate and find these people that have a mindset for like organizational change within their profession of teaching, and help them run for offices at like the state board level, like just starting like, let's get some people on the local school board, let's run for like, you know, the state board of education, let's like get educators of various levels in positions politically where they can influence education policy, because there's a really big deficit of actual educators of any kind, no matter what level, within policy. And, you know, just looking at the two schools that I've worked in and have done the research in, there's like there's not a single educator on the board. The State Board of Education for Georgia has like one person that's retired like 45 years ago. And so like kind of some kind of education lobby, grassroots. I think of kind of how AOC and that whole like group of people did this whole like grassroots to get like women and people of color and like marginalized communities to run for office and like kind of infiltrate at those levels. And that would be like my really big pie in the sky dreams.
Well, I think I can see you do that, Danielle. So hopefully they're not that pie in the sky. And I think it's great just to have that, those dreams and those goals. So appreciate it. Thank you so much. And it looks like we're kind of running out of time. So
Yeah,
I know, yes, but we are going to move you into a little breakout room, and we'll stay here. We'll take a few minutes to deliberate, and then we'll ask you to come back in. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We'll let Dr. Smith do all his things. Okay. So welcome back. We are pleased to announce that Danielle has successfully defended her problem of practice dissertation. And after final revisions and upon any coursework and graduation, she will be known as Dr. Danielle Sweetman Richoux. So congratulations, Danielle. We're so excited for you. Excited to see what you're going to do in the future. Good luck on your move. Good luck on health, all those good things. And looking forward, I hope you're going to be here in December too. So
I am. I will be there.
Okay, good. Well, we will be here too to see you. So congratulations. Go celebrate.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All
Thank you.
right. Thank you. Bye-bye.